Hi, my name's Paul and welcome to my garage. It's home to my 1958 MGA Roadster and a 2004 Caterham Academy Road Sport, car that I've had since 2016 and spent many happy miles racing around tracks in the UK. However, that's a story maybe for another time. We're here to talk about the MGA, which I acquired at the beginning of 2019 from a chap called Craig Carter down in East Sussex. She was originally exported to the US, where she spent the first 30 years of her life in Arizona and received some restoration work during that time, which became obvious from the US parts labels that I found when I stripped her back. In 1989, she was brought back to the UK, where she benefited from a right-hand drive conversion and a cosmetic respray from her original black to the Orion red that you see her in today. She then stayed with the previous owner for 26 years, who looked after her exceptionally well, as the lack of rust paid testimony to. Throughout 2019, the MGA behaved impeccably as I managed to squeeze in a couple of thousand miles touring with some of my fellow classic car chums, and we took part in our local vintage hill climb event, the Cop Hill Climb Festival. It was during our annual Cop Hill event that my fellow classic car enthusiasts, the Rusty Nuts, hatched a plan to visit the 2020 Le Mans Classic. So I decided that I wanted to improve the look of the engine bay and carry out a 5-speed gearbox conversion before the long trip. Fortunately, I already had a spare rebuilt gearbox from the Caterham's numerous track days. Work on the restoration started in earnest at the end of January this year, and with some help from the Rusty Nuts, we soon had the engine and gearbox out. My original plan was to just give the engine bay a respray, but after a quick discussion with Steve Cato of Cato Restorations, we agreed a full respray would be a far better investment. 4 weeks later, she was back here in the garage and the world was a very different place. As the pandemic was starting to bite, it wasn't long before news of the Le Mans Classic's postponement began to break. As disappointing as this was, it opened up the opportunity to take my restoration to the next level, and so a full nut and bolt restoration of the MGA began. And so, with the help, advice, encouragement, sarcasm and general banter from my Rusty Nut chums, I got stuck into a voyage of discovery, of stripping and rebuilding this gorgeous car. My plan was to retain her originality with a few minor upgrades to make her a more enjoyable drive, capable of long distance touring. Modifications have included fitting an alternator, conversion to negative earth, a new fuse box, the 5-speed gearbox, disc brakes to the front, Spax dampers to replace the rear Armstrong units, and LED enhancements to the running and brake lights. As I progressed through the rebuild, I came to appreciate just how lucky I'd been to select an MGA as my first foray into classic cars. Stripping and rebuilding an MGA requires no specialist equipment, and when stripped back to just the chassis and body shell, she is light enough to tip on her side and ease the access to all those hard to reach areas. Never far from the action, either remotely or sometimes in person when COVID allowed, were a great bunch of mates who have been on hand to lend their tools, their advice and muscle whenever called upon. And so, as September approached, our annual Cop Hill event was cancelled. By way of a thank you to the Rusty Nuts, I organised an alternative Cop Hill event, a COVID-safe run of our classic cars up both Cop Hill and the nearby Aston Hill that gave its name to Aston Martin. On the 11th of September, just 7 months after taking her off the road, the MG was on her way to RH Automotive for an MOT test, which she passed with flying colours and gave me the confidence to proudly lead our small band of classics around the Chiltern Hills without a hitch. Well, I say without a hitch. She was not revving as eagerly as she did before the rebuild, and she also managed to shed one of the rear damper bolts as we arrived back home after the 30-mile run. Fortunately, no damage was done, but it did give everyone a good giggle at my expense. So what next? Well, we're all clearly eagerly looking for 2021, and specifically myself and the Rusty Nuts are looking forward to our trip to the Classic Le Mans back in July, and of course Cop Hill Climb will be very much on our agenda. Next year represents the 110th anniversary of the first running of the Cop Hill Climb back in 1910, and we'll be there with our Scalextric track, Havenwood Raceway. And so please do come and join us 18th, 19th of September, when we'll be able to host you to some small track racing, and hopefully you might be able to win a ride up the hill in my pride and joy. So in these COVID times, I'd say stay safe, and hopefully maybe the idea of lifting your eyes to think about what we can look forward to next year. I've clearly got many miles of happy driving to look forward to in the MG, and many more hours of working out of my garage, tinkering, keeping the car fully tuned and looking as good as she does today. So thank you for listening. Hope it's been of interest, and stay safe, Garagistas.